Welcome to Farm Connections. I'm Dan Hoffman. On today's show, we visit with Harry Carr about the unique way he markets the protein raised on his farm. Ken Tisi explains today's economic conditions in relationship to the 1980s. Lynn Kittleson reports on the many useful co-products of ethanol. Up first, I talk with the folks at the Forever Green Initiative to learn about new cash crops for farmers. Stay with us. Farm Connections is next.
Welcome to Farm Connections with your host, Dan Hoffman.
Farm Connections, sponsored by Alcorn Clean Fuel, a farmer-owned cooperative in Claremont, Minnesota, produces ethanol, high-protein livestock feed, and corn oil and beverage-grade carbon dioxide for resale to benefit its members and their communities. Absolute Energy, a locally owned facility, produces 115 million gallons of ethanol annually, proudly supporting local economies in Iowa and Minnesota. Absolute Energy, adding value to the neighborhood. Prow Company, a hands-on commercial property leasing company. Leasing commercial properties in Rochester, Minnesota since 1952. Realtors and brokers welcome. Prow Company.
We're at the University of Minnesota at the research plots with Dr. Don Wise. Don, welcome to Farm Connections.
Thanks for coming, and we're very happy to have you here and very excited to have you learn about the Forever Green Initiative here at the University of Minnesota.
Well, since you mentioned it, what is the Forever Green?
Yeah, the Forever Green Initiative is basically a consortium that has been developed over the last 20 years, really designed to develop the next generation of crops for the state of Minnesota. A lot of people kind of forget every once in a while that where we're standing today is really the site of the development of all of the major crops that are on the landscape today. Hybrid corn was developed here. Soybeans were developed here. Wheat, barley, and oat all came from a public investment, and in the fields around here really is the experimental sites where those crops came from. So we are now looking at what comes next. What is the next generation of crops that farmers can use to increase their profitability and present a more sustainable agricultural system for the future?
Well, fascinating things, and you tripped a memory for me when you mentioned that. My grandfather in probably the 1940s talked about a new crop called soybeans, and before that it was used as a legume and harvested, and then eventually he took his thrashing machine to a neighbor, came home and told Grandma, "We did it." You did what? We separated the seed from the plant, and a new industry was emerging in Minnesota. Are you on the front edge of something like that?
That's exactly where we're at, and there's only one major difference now. We have the technologies to domesticate new crops in a way that was never possible in the history of humankind. We call this basic plant genomics. That basic genomic understanding can be used to domesticate a wide range of new plants. Our focus here is not on just another summer annual, but it's on the development of perennial grains as well as winter annual grain crops that produce a continuous living cover on the landscape, not only to have a high level of productivity, but to produce those ecosystem services. But one thing we have to have, if these systems are going to work, we have to have an economic pull to make it happen. In other words, the farmers have to be in a position to make a profit, or that landscape will not change. So in our program, that's really what we're trying to do. So each of our programs, we have 16 of them, working from basic genomics, breeding, agronomics, and end use, basically trying to put the grains from these new crops into the marketplace, working with companies like General Mills, Patagonia, Kellogg, a wide range of companies that can incorporate these new crops into their food products in the same way they did with wheat, barley, corn that we now see on the landscape today. So the story is basically repeating itself with a new technology that's going to allow us to develop those crops a little bit faster.
Well, it's bigger than just the farmers and the consumers. It's actually jobs too. When I think about what you said about wheat development, and of course Minnesota has a huge history and legacy in that area, but think about the milling district in Minneapolis, the world's breadbasket, right?
You're absolutely right. That's the other part that we would love to highlight. You know, as we all know, as this program goes out to rural America needs new economic opportunity. And we're looking at these new crops in a way as being spun out in the context of new companies that can do not only the production, the processing, the milling, and potentially being part of the development of new food products for the future, bringing opportunity to rural Minnesota so young minds can stay in those communities.
Awesome. You spoke of some words we need to talk about, annuals versus perennial. Let's start with that.
Well, an annual is a life cycle of a plant that basically produces seed within one growing season. A perennial is a crop that will stay on the landscape and produce seed for many, many years. For example, a fruit tree is a perennial, right? Corn is an annual. That would be a summer annual. But I also did mention another type of annual. That's a winter annual that you seed in the fall and you harvest early the next spring. We're developing those winter annuals to fill the brown spot in the corn and soybean rotation. As all of us that grew up in Minnesota and still drive around the state of Minnesota, in the fall our landscapes look pretty brown. And they stay pretty brown well into the first part of June. These winter annuals can fit into that brown period, not only just covering that landscape, but actually using the water, the nutrients that are left over from the previous crop to produce a grain that can be moved into the marketplace. So ecosystem services, but also at the same time generating new economic opportunity for Minnesota farmers.
And more crops per square foot and per acre.
Yeah, some of our early data basically shows that with pennycress, camelina grown in the soybean system, yields can be doubled.
Nice.
What's the value of the pennycress, you would ask? Those are the things that are going on now in terms of how those products from those new crops could be worked into the marketplace.
Awesome stuff. And you talked a little bit about genomics. Sounds like a big word. Break it down to better understanding for us.
What it allows us to do is identify traits that are of interest. For example, the trait controlling oil content in these brassicas. We can identify those genes, make the crosses, and pick those hybrids that carry the gene, the allele that we want, without having to grow all of them out. It speeds up the breeding process. It speeds it up dramatically. That will allow us to move those new crops into the marketplace.
Dr. Wise, give us an example of a crop that you're researching.
Yeah, one of the best examples that we could give you for a number of reasons, but one of the reasons being we are moving now into commercial production and evaluation in real food products for marketing to the public. It's called intermediate wheatgrass, and it's in the background as we're speaking here. It's a perennial grain that is a cousin of wheat. As a matter of fact, it can be crossed with wheat, but no one has ever taken on the challenge of developing intermediate wheatgrass as a perennial grain. One of the primary reasons that we're interested in it is, as I described first, ecosystem services. Covers the soil for a number of years, harvests the grain each year, no reason to till the soil and plant it every year. So we're looking at potential production over a 5 to 6 year period without any tillage. The only inputs would be planting a legume into the system or applying some nitrogen. But again, having that grain without an end use doesn't give us much progress. So a large portion of the research that is underway is determining the value of this grain for use in food food products. So again, it's just a good example of what we described to you earlier. A perennial grain that we don't have at this point in time. It will be the first for use in Minnesota and throughout the Midwest that produces those ecosystem services, lower levels of input, but also has an opportunity to be moved into the marketplace so consumers can be part of the solution. They can buy products that produce these ecosystem services that are profitable to the farmer and provide benefit to all of society by producing ecosystem services.
Sounds like a lot of collaboration.
It is. There's a lot of collaboration.
Thank you so much for that. And just wrapping up, what's your vision? If this project, this research is successful, what will be the outcome?
So there's two pieces that we want to focus on. What will the outcome be? New economic opportunities for farmers and ecosystem services for society.
Thank you, Dr. Wise. Very good information.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for stopping by.
Stay tuned for more as we visit with another person at the University of Minnesota on how we apply this research. Dr. Ismail, welcome to Farm Connections.
Thank you. Welcome.
We just had a wonderful conversation with Dr. Wise about what's happening in this research plot. How do you fit into this?
So yes, how I fit into this is I'm a food scientist, so I work closely with the breeders and the agronomists that are trying to breed those new crops and develop them for food production. So while they care about yield and maturity and seed size, we care about quality traits. So we look into flavor, for example. We look at functionality, so how would these grains would function or contribute to structure in a food product. We look at storage stability, because these grains are going to be harvested and stored for a long period of time. Would they become rancid? Would they last for a year? Would they last for 2 years? So we look into that. And we also look at nutrient content, which is very important. How much protein you have in there, how much dietary fiber is in there, so that it's kind of a selling point for the consumer.
So the research presents a product to you or a food item. What do you do with it? You take it into a kitchen, into a lab, into a truck. What do you do with it?
What do we do with the grains? So first of all, we take the grains and we mill it into flour. And then from there, we start our characterization in the lab. We look at flavor chemistry, we look at the components, and then we look at rheology. Let's say we make a dough out of that flour, and we look at the rheology and whether that dough can successfully give us a loaf of bread similar to using wheat flour. Because, for example, to me, wheatgrass is very related to wheat. So, but it doesn't exactly have the same functionality. So we look at its functionality and see where it fits better in the food chain. Does it make a better bread? Does it make a better pasta? Or does it, you just add it in a nutrition bar and off we go?
And what's the most important thing or significant thing you found in your lab yet? What struck you as really interesting?
What struck us as really interesting is there was a very huge similarity between the wheat and between the forever intermediate wheat grain. And it has high protein content and it has high fiber content. So it's a great selling point. And manufacturer has the talent to incorporate these grains in any type of product. That's what they do. That's their job. So if we tell them this has a great sustainability story and this kit has high protein, has high fiber, then they will grab that and then use it in applications, and then it would be a selling point for the consumers.
And actually those manufacturers or food processors will develop a market.
Exactly. So they will develop a market, they will run a survey and see what this kind of product would it sell and how well it would sell, how well the consumers are going to accept it.
Let's say the product or the grains pass your laboratory tests of rancidity, shelf life, and all those things. What happens to it next?
Then if we have good production, for example, General Mills is very interested in storage, shelf life. They tell us, okay, so if this has a long storage or shelf life, then we can use it. But then the main hurdle, do we have enough production on the field? So they need to have a huge amount of grain so that they can incorporate it in their products. So once we say, okay, it has a stamp from our lab, it's good to go, then they're going to ask, do we have enough of it? And then after that, they will get their supply and start producing it and commercializing it.
How do you get it implemented with using our farmers?
So the farmers obviously need to buy in and know that there is a market pull for them to plant these crops. And the way that they can find out about this information is they either contact us directly or we actually reach out to them, and we hold conferences and we include farmers, we invite them and we educate them about our Forever Green initiative.
Neat. Fascinating. Keep up the good work. We need new products. You're awesome.
Thank you.
Ken Tisi is up next with an economic comparison.
Thanks, Dan. Many times in the past couple of years, I've been asked if we are heading into a serious farm economic recession that rivals the 1980s. Many comparisons have been made with the agricultural economy that existed in the late 1970s, with the record grain prices, high farm profits, and rapid increases in land values that existed from 2010 to 2013. Farm economic conditions changed dramatically from the late 1970s to the early 1980s, leading to the serious financial crisis. While there are many similarities in today's farm economy, there are also some differences from the 1980s. At the peak of the 1980s financial crisis, 17% of the farms in the U.S. were financially stressed, and 46,000 commercial farms were forced out of business. Strain on farm families, ag lenders, and rural communities was quite high. Today, it's estimated that less than 10% of farm operators are facing serious financial difficulty. Total net farm income more than doubled from the late 1960s to 1973, and then by 1983, total U.S. farm income had declined by 80% from a decade earlier. By comparison, net farm income in the U.S. peaked at $116 billion in 2013, but dropped to only $53 billion in 2015. While this was dramatic, it's not nearly as severe as the 1980s. Cost of production for corn and soybeans, including seed, fertilizer, chemicals, and fuel, rose dramatically from 2008 to 13, more than doubling during that period. Many producers now have a break-even price for corn production near $4 per bushel and over $11 per bushel for soybeans, which is well above current price levels. One difference between the 1980s and today is the level of farm debt carried by farm operators. Farm debt increased by 74% during the 1970s, and the debt became unsustainable by the 1980s when asset values declined. While current farm debt has increased, most debt is much better structured than the 1980s. One big difference is interest rates, which rose as high as 20% in the early 1980s and were highly unstable. By comparison, both short and long-term interest rates today have remained quite low and very stable. The current fall in commodity prices and tight profit margins in both crop and livestock production are likely to create some financial challenges for numerous farm operators in the next couple of years. However, there are reasons to believe that we are not headed into another serious farm financial crisis. This has been Kent Tc, and we'll talk to you next time.
With us on Farm Connections is Harry Carr of Mint Creek, located in Illinois. Welcome, Harry.
Welcome, Dan.
We want to hear more about what you do on this farm. What is it all about?
We're a 225-acre multi-species livestock farm. We raise sheep and goats, cattle and pigs, ducks, turkeys, chickens, egg-laying chickens, egg-laying ducks.
Well, 225 acres doesn't sound like the traditional small CSA farm. That's fairly large. Why is it that large?
Well, actually, it needs to be larger, okay? Because we just can't keep up with the demand. We probably have 2 or 3 times easy the demand for our product from our customers than we can supply. So it's a problem that we keep struggling with, and we're looking to grow our farm, grow our model, and kind of set the standard in the area for the very best, highest quality of animal proteins available.
What is your model?
Well, when we started marketing to the public directly and skipping over the commodity market, which is very tough to make a living at when you're the size that we are, we started doing farmers markets. We've grown that from one market that we did in 2005 to about a dozen markets that we do in the Chicago area currently. So it's a major operation to do 12 farmers markets a week ongoing, and we also have about a third of our business is selling to stores and restaurants, and about a third of our business is selling CSA shares to customers. And what a CSA share is, CSA stands for customer or consumer supported agriculture. And the idea evolved when vegetable farmers would sell shares to people that wanted their produce but didn't know what type of year they would have. So at the beginning of the season they would sell shares and then divvy up whatever the fruits of the land were. So you could get very little or quite a lot depending upon how good a year it was. So it's a way of risk mitigation. It's a way of the customer helping the small farmer out and sharing in the risk of whether it may be a good year or a bad year. So we're kind of stealing that model from the vegetable, the produce people by doing it with livestock. And what happens is a customer will express an interest. We have a variety of Csa shares on our website. They can look and kind of pick something that fits what they're interested in. We have monthly shares. They can buy 3 months at a time or 6 months at a time. Typically it's paid for in advance, which is great for the farmer. We will either deliver to the farmer's market where they can pick up, or we'll deliver it to their house. We do get a delivery charge for, obviously, for home delivery. We also have weekly Csa shares, and we can include with them eggs, which we produce a lot of eggs, chicken and duck eggs, milk from a local dairy, and a variety of meats that we have available. So our meat packages are to a certain degree customizable. For instance, if you just want pork and poultry, you can get that. If you just want lamb and goat, you can get that. We also have a traditional, which is a little bit everything. What it provides us is the ability to further connect with our customers, helps our cash flow to get paid in advance. It helps us work out inventory vagary. Sometimes you're long on, sometimes it's the most expensive cuts. And the cheaper cuts tend to sell faster than the most expensive cuts sometimes. So in the Csa share, the customer may be blessed by getting some of the fanciest, most expensive stuff because we have an excess of it. So it's a way to work out our inventory inconsistency.
Well, how does that impact your farm operation?
Well, because we're selling year-round, most commodity market livestock farmers are having the babies born from the bird stock at a particular time of year and then raising those animals up to when they're harvested at another particular time of year. We try to spread that birthing and harvesting throughout the whole season. So we're harvesting animals on a regular basis, at least several times a month, sometimes as often as once a week in the busy season. So we're always harvesting and we're always having new babies born to all the different animals that we raise on the farm.
So it's a year-round 365 deal.
It's a 365 deal.
You've mentioned several species on your farm. How do you get them to all work together to make this system work?
Well, we have a number of methods, some somewhat innovative that we've evolved. One method that we use I would call progressive grazing. And the idea started when we were raising ducks out on pasture and having trouble getting the ducks to lay eggs in nests. So every day was an Easter egg hunt when you're looking for duck eggs. And in the tall grass, that was very difficult and not an efficient use of time. So we found that by grazing the goats and then the turkeys, all of a sudden we could find the duck eggs because there wasn't a whole lot left. So ideas like progressive grazing, mob grazing, there's all sorts of synergies when you're dealing with multiple groups of livestock. Just like in nature, biodiversity is a very important thing that we've really devastated with our monocropping industrial agriculture.
And the animals sometimes use insects and other things in the native prairie to produce?
Actually, you'll find that chickens, for instance, will eat very little forage or grass, but a substantial amount of insects. So we want to encourage the insect population in our perennial pasture. And by trying to work with native species, we found that the insect population will increase drastically, and it's basically free feed, Dan.
Very fascinating. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you, Dan.
Stay tuned for more Farm Connections.
Critics of ethanol production have used the argument that corn should be used for food, not fuel. However, proponents of ethanol say that argument is simply not valid. Groups like the Minnesota Corn Research and Promotion Council are active promoting just why ethanol makes so much sense for America. Haley Ortmeyer-Clark is with Minnesota Corn.
When you produce ethanol, you're not choosing fuel over food. It's more of you're producing this fuel, and you can also, from that, have a byproduct called distillers dried grains with solubles, and that's actually a high-protein livestock feed that will go to feeding pigs, cattle, all of those different types of livestock. So in the end, it actually turns around, and making that fuel is fuel for the animals, too, that comes back as food on your plate.
There's a lot of fuel in a bushel of corn and more.
Well, from a bushel of corn, when you put it into ethanol production, you're going to come back with 3 gallons of ethanol that is used for the fuel. And then you're also going to get about 18 pounds of the distiller's dry grains with solubles, which is used as that livestock feed. But that's not all that you can get from your bushel of corn when you put it into ethanol production. You're also going to get back CO2, or carbon dioxide, which will go into your carbonated drinks like your soda pops and ginger ale. And then you can also get a variety of different things depending on the type of ethanol plant that it's going into.
Going out and meeting the public and telling the story of corn is what Minnesota Corn is all about. When you drive by a field of corn, very few people think about all the many uses for this wonderful plant. Through groups like the Minnesota Corn Research and Promotion Council, there are literally thousands of new uses for corn and many more uses, no doubt, coming in the future. This is Lynn Kettleson reporting.
Thanks for joining us. Whether you're raising livestock, experimenting with cutting-edge crops, or creating energy with corn or beans, Farm Connections is telling your story. See you next time.